A racist security guard blatantly harassed a black woman solely because of the color of her skin. But when her true identity was revealed, he was left stunned, reeling as if struck by a crushing blow. His entire career, built on arrogance and prejudice, crumbled before his very eyes. This is not just a story exposing the true face of an abuser of power, but also a sharp warning about the dangers of bias and injustice. Don't miss this shocking tale. Subscribe to the channel and join us in uncovering the truth. At the age of 42, Olivia Harper achieved something that few people could, becoming the regional police chief, a position of great power and prestige within law enforcement. But what made Olivia truly remarkable wasn't just her title. Behind her calm demeanor and sharp gaze was a woman who had overcome countless challenges to reach her current position. From the very beginning of her career, Olivia was no stranger to skepticism and prejudice. As a woman of color in a field traditionally dominated by men, she faced scrutinizing looks, whispered remarks behind her back, and even outright contemptuous comments. But rather than letting these break her spirit, Olivia turned them into motivation. In her professional life, Olivia Harper was a leader who showed zero tolerance for injustice, someone who acted relentlessly in the name of fairness and equity. But outside the uniform and badge, Olivia chose to live a simple life. She believed that a person's true worth lay not in their titles or authority, but in how they treated others. Olivia's private life was a completely different world. On weekend mornings, she put away her police uniform, replacing it with simple jeans and a t-shirt. Those were the moments when she became her true self. Not a police chief, not a symbol, but just an ordinary woman who enjoyed shopping, taking walks, and caring for her beloved dog. Yet, Olivia never forgot her childhood memories of being treated unfairly because of her skin color. Once, when she was a 10-year-old girl, a store clerk stopped her and accused her of stealing simply because she lingered at a counter for a few minutes too long. The humiliation and helplessness of that day etched themselves deeply into her mind, serving as a constant reminder that she needed to do something to change how the world perceived and treated people like her. That is Olivia Harper, a strong, intelligent woman, yet one filled with emotion and compassion. And on this peaceful morning, she had no idea that she was about to face a situation that would stir up all the memories and values she had built her life around. In a crowded store, under the bright fluorescent lights, Olivia walked in, unaware that the eyes of a security guard, Ethan Brooks, had already locked on to her. And, with prejudice ingrained deeply in his mind, Ethan didn't see a woman shopping. He saw a suspect. The story now shifts from tranquility to a tense confrontation, where prejudice and justice will be brought to light. The automatic glass doors slid open, bringing with them the noisy hum of a bustling store. Olivia Harper stepped inside, a light plastic basket swaying gently in her hand as her eyes scanned the colorful shelves. Dressed in jeans, a simple t-shirt, and sneakers, she blended seamlessly into the crowd, revealing no trace of her societal position. This was Olivia, without the badge or authority, just an ordinary woman enjoying a weekend morning. The store was a place Olivia often visited to escape the pressures of work. She enjoyed the sense of freedom as she strolled through the aisles, picking out essentials for her daily life. Today was no different. She planned to buy some household items, groceries, and a few toys for her beloved dog. But that peace didn't last long. As Olivia focused on choosing a box of cereal, she became acutely aware of someone's gaze fixed on her. At first, she told herself she might just be overly sensitive. Working in law enforcement often heightened her sense of vigilance. Yet the feeling didn't go away. At the end of the aisle stood a tall man in a security uniform, arms crossed, his eyes locked on her. Ethan Brooks, the store's security guard, was watching Olivia with a look of suspicion as if waiting for her to make a mistake. Olivia felt a creeping unease. Maybe it's just a coincidence, she thought, trying to brush it off. But when she moved to another aisle, Ethan continued to follow, keeping a distance but making no effort to hide his presence. Ethan wasn't a typical security guard. Having worked in high-crime areas for some time, he had developed a dangerous habit, judging people solely based on their appearance and surface-level behavior. To Ethan, anyone who didn't look right was a potential suspect. And today, Olivia Harper, a black woman dressed casually, had inadvertently become his target. Every step Olivia took remained under Ethan's watchful eye. He convinced himself it was professional instinct, but in reality it was the prejudice ingrained in his mind. What Ethan didn't realize was that his biased gaze would soon lead him to a serious mistake, one that would change his life. Olivia tried to stay calm, but her instincts as a police officer told her this was no coincidence. She decided to test the situation. She abruptly changed direction, heading toward a quieter section of the store. But as soon as she stopped at the cleaning supplies aisle, there he was again. Ethan's familiar figure lingered at the end of the aisle, this time closer, arms still crossed, eyes never leaving her. The crowd of shoppers around them remained oblivious to what was happening. But Olivia knew she wasn't imagining things. Ethan Brooks wasn't just watching. He was waiting for a moment to act. And Olivia, despite her reluctance, felt her peaceful morning on the verge of turning into a confrontation she hadn't anticipated. The atmosphere in the store seemed to grow heavier. Inside Olivia, a wave of simmering indignation began to rise. Was this the moment she needed to take a stand, not just for herself, but for all those who had been unfairly treated like her? The answer would soon reveal itself. Olivia moved slowly through the aisles, her eyes fixed on her shopping list, but the feeling of being watched refused to leave her. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted Ethan Brooks, the tall man in the security uniform, persistently tailing her. This time, the distance between them was shorter. Ethan leaned against a shelf, arms crossed, his gaze openly filled with suspicion. Olivia was accustomed to being observed in her line of work, but this wasn't the look of respect or cooperation. It was a look of scrutiny, mistrust, and deep prejudice. Ethan Brooks seemed to have formed an opinion about Olivia the moment he laid eyes on her. A black woman in simple clothing, moving from one aisle to the next, surely couldn't be innocent. As Olivia paused at the household goods section to examine a set of dishes, Ethan stood so close that she could feel his presence without needing to look. What truly irritated Olivia, though, was his complete disregard for the people around him, particularly one white man who looked genuinely suspicious. At the far end of the aisle, the man in an oversized coat appeared to be trying to slip an item into his pocket. He glanced around furtively, his behavior undeniably alarming. Olivia observed the scene for a few seconds, waiting for Ethan to notice and intervene. But he didn't. Ethan's gaze never shifted. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on Olivia. He ignored everything else happening around him as if every wrong in the store was centered on one person, her. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She had endured too much injustice in her life not to recognize what was happening here. Ethan wasn't watching her because of any suspicious behavior. He was watching her for one reason: the color of her skin. In Ethan's mind, he was simply doing his job. Years in security had convinced him that his instincts were infallible. Unfortunately, those instincts were shaped by prejudice. He told himself he was protecting the store, but in truth, he was judging people based on their appearance, their clothing, and, in Olivia's case, their race. The troubling part was that Ethan hadn't always been this way. He grew up in a family where his parents frequently warned him about the potential dangers of people who didn't look like them. Stories about black thieves or suspicious strangers were repeated like lessons to live by. When Ethan started working in security in high-crime areas, he quickly became fixated on these stereotypes. The rare instances of chasing shoplifters only reinforced his warped belief that anyone who didn't fit the norm was a threat. But deep down, Ethan didn't realize that his narrow experiences and upbringing had blinded him. To him, suspecting Olivia wasn't a mistake. It was a way of protecting the store. His complacency and habit of judging others by their appearance were so ingrained that he no longer questioned whether his instincts were right. Olivia understood this all too well. At that moment, a question formed in her mind. If I weren't the police chief, if I didn't have power, how much worse would this treatment get? Ethan, on the other hand, had no idea that he had chosen the wrong person to target today, and the smug look in his eyes would soon be replaced by something he never expected. When Olivia set down the set of dishes and walked to another aisle, she made a decision. She wouldn't let this slide. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly by people like Ethan. She knew what she would do next, but first she needed to see how far Ethan would go. Olivia had just stepped into the cleaning supplies section when a cold, arrogant voice cut through the air behind her. "You, stop right there. I need to check your bag immediately." The words were like a blade slicing through, sharp and heavy. The space around Olivia seemed to freeze for a moment. She turned around, her eyes meeting Ethan's. Smug expression, his gaze glowing with triumph as if he held an irrefutable verdict in his hands. Shoppers nearby, startled by the confrontation, paused. Curious stares began to gather, and the air grew heavy with tension, whispers threading through the crowd. Ethan didn't wait for Olivia to respond. He began striding toward her, his footsteps striking the tiled floor with an icy precision that sent chills through the room. "You've been acting very suspiciously since you walked in here," he said loudly, his voice tinged with accusation and judgment. "Constantly switching aisles, looking around like you're trying to avoid me." To Ethan, this wasn't just a routine bag check. It was an opportunity to prove he was always right, that his instincts never failed. In the past, he'd stopped a few shoplifters, and in his mind, those incidents had cemented the false belief that everyone he suspected was guilty. What Ethan failed to recognize was that his suspicions always seemed to target a particular group of people, those who didn't look like him. Ethan took pride in his ability to see through others, but he didn't realize that his arrogance had turned him into someone who abused his power. Today, when he saw Olivia, he didn't see a woman shopping. He saw a pre-constructed image in his mind, one that he didn't think could be wrong. Nearby shoppers turned to watch, their faces a mix of curiosity and surprise. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. "What's going on?" A middle-aged woman murmured to her friend. "Did she do something wrong?" Another voice asked, but no one had an answer. As Ethan loudly accused Olivia of suspicious behavior, the initial curiosity among the crowd began shifting to unease. A man shook his head, muttering to his wife, "This is outrageous. He doesn't even have any proof." A young woman, standing closer to the scene, raised her phone and started recording. Olivia took a deep breath, steadying herself even as anger boiled within her. This wasn't the first time she'd been treated this way, But the public humiliation was something she could never get used to. Before she could utter a word, Ethan continued, his tone even sharper. If you've got nothing to hide, then there's no reason to refuse a bag check. Hand it over now. Her grip on the shopping bag in her hand tightened instinctively, a reflexive reaction to his intimidation. Olivia raised her head, her eyes turning icy as she spoke, her words measured and commanding. Are you accusing me of stealing? The question wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to make the air around them still once again. Ethan raised an eyebrow, a mocking smile flashing across his face. I'm not accusing anyone, he said, though his tone betrayed his words. I'm just doing my job. If you got nothing to hide, it'd be easier to just prove it. They stood facing each other like two opponents about to engage in battle. Olivia stepped forward, narrowing the space between them, but not as a sign of submission. Her voice rang out, clear and sharp as a blade. And you think I deserve to be checked? For what reason? Because I'm shopping? Or because I don't fit your idea of what's normal? Her question hit like an unexpected blow, making Ethan hesitate for a moment. But he quickly regained his aggressive posture, even doubling down. Don't make this personal, Ethan retorted, attempting to sound authoritative. I'm just following store policy. You know, we've had issues with people like you before. People like you. Olivia immediately understood the condescending implication in his words. She wasn't the only one. The growing discomfort on some of the faces in the crowd made it clear they understood too. The whispers around them grew louder, but Ethan, unbothered, stood firm, waiting for Olivia to back down. But she didn't. You should be careful with your words, Olivia said, her voice low and steely, like a blade fresh out of the fire. I don't have to prove anything to you. If you think you have the right to humiliate me in front of everyone here, you're mistaken. Ethan scoffed, but there was a flicker of doubt in his confidence as he faced Olivia's unyielding stance. If you won't cooperate, I'll have to ask you to leave, he said loudly, trying to regain control of the situation. Go ahead, Olivia replied firmly. Her eyes swept over the crowd, now fully engrossed in the scene. And remember, everyone here will be a witness to how you treated an innocent customer. The tension reached a boiling point. The atmosphere was so thick it felt almost tangible. The onlookers were no longer mere spectators. They were becoming part of the confrontation. And in Olivia's eyes, there was no fear, only determination. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, for those whom Ethan believed he could bully without consequence. This time, Olivia wouldn't back down. The atmosphere seemed to freeze at that moment as Olivia slowly placed her shopping basket on the floor, her movements deliberate and powerful, as if she were preparing for an uncompromising confrontation. Her hands lightly clasped in front of her, her posture straight and commanding, and her unwavering gaze locked onto Ethan. You said my behavior is suspicious, Olivia began, her voice clear and cold as ice, reverberating through the heavy silence. Exactly how? What have I done to make you suspicious? The question, simple yet weighted, caused Ethan to blink momentarily. He hadn't expected Olivia to respond so directly. The surrounding shoppers, previously absorbed in their carts and lists, had now stopped entirely. Curious, skeptical, and even indignant glances began to shift toward Ethan. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to regain his earlier confidence. He raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint, mocking smile, but his voice no longer held the sharpness it did before. You kept changing directions, walking back and forth between aisles looking around. You were trying to avoid me. That's suspicious behavior. Olivia let out a soft laugh, not loud, but laden with challenge. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan's face, dissecting his every word. So, in your eyes, a woman shopping, browsing through items in the store, is enough to be considered suspicious? Her voice was steady, but each word pierced through Ethan's thin justification like a needle through the fabric. She stepped closer to Ethan, closing the distance between them almost entirely. Her voice turned sharp, each word deliberate and slicing through his arrogance. You said I deserved to be checked for suspicious behavior. Then tell me, how do you define suspicious behavior? Is it walking through aisles, or is it having a skin color different from yours? Ethan faltered momentarily, as if searching for a rebuttal. Instead of responding, he raised an eyebrow and maintained his haughty demeanor. Olivia didn't give him a chance to regain control. Or perhaps, she said, her voice steady yet cutting, you're pretending not to see what's happening right behind you. She pointed toward a white man standing near a shelf, surreptitiously stuffing an item into his coat pocket. The truly suspicious person is right there, but you didn't notice. Why, Ethan? Because you were too busy trying to humiliate me in front of everyone here. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. A few people turned to look at the man Olivia had pointed out. A woman gasped, "He's stealing!" The man was caught off guard, fumbled, and then bolted. But by now, all eyes had turned to Ethan. Ethan cleared his throat, folding his arms across his chest in a defensive gesture. That's not the case, he said, his voice wavering slightly. But this store has had problems with people like you. The air grew heavier, more oppressive. His words hung in the room like a slow-moving bomb, spreading waves of indignation among the onlookers. Whispers grew louder, and glances shifted from curiosity to outrage. A few people shook their heads in disbelief. Olivia tilted her head slightly, a subtle yet commanding gesture. Her voice rang out, sharp and filled with challenge. What exactly do you mean by people like me? Go ahead, say it out loud. Or are you too afraid to admit what you're implying? Ethan froze, caught off guard. For a fleeting moment, his expression betrayed uncertainty. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Don't make this complicated, he said hastily, trying to reclaim his authority. I'm not being discriminatory. I'm just doing my job. Doing your job? Olivia raised an eyebrow, her gaze filled with contempt. Then tell me, Ethan, who exactly are you protecting this store from? A woman shopping peacefully, or the white man over there, the one you ignored completely as he stuffed merchandise into his coat? Olivia's question detonated in the room like an explosion. The crowd's attention shifted collectively to the man she had indicated. Indeed, a blond man stood in the corner of the store, trying to discreetly pocket an item. The whispers grew louder. A woman shook her head, muttering, "Unbelievable. He accuses her instead." Ethan, realizing he'd been cornered, stood rigidly. His eyes darted between Olivia and the crowd, searching for an escape, but none was in sight. His initial confidence had evaporated, replaced by an expression of embarrassment and anger. Olivia stepped closer, her footsteps echoing clearly on the tiled floor, each one more commanding than the last. Her voice was calm but powerful as she said, "You thought I'd stay silent, didn't you? That I'd lower my head and let you insult me because you have a little authority? You were wrong, Ethan." The atmosphere had completely shifted in Olivia's favor. The crowd began murmuring more loudly, some even raising their phones to record the confrontation. A young man spoke up, his voice clear. "She's right. You owe her an apology." Ethan opened his mouth to say something but couldn't find the right words. He looked around, his shoulders tense, but every gaze around him was no longer on his side. His eyes finally landed on Olivia, all traces of arrogance gone, replaced with helplessness. Olivia, aware of her victory, remained composed. "You chose the wrong person to confront," she said, her voice steady, every word landing like a final judgment. "And you'll never forget this moment when an entire room witnessed you lose control because of the injustice you created." The room fell silent for a long, heavy moment. Ethan, unable to say another word, turned and walked away, leaving Olivia standing amidst the crowd, who now looked at her with admiration. A smattering of applause broke out behind her, punctuating the tension that had just been shattered. Olivia took a deep breath, picked up her shopping basket and walked away, her steps resolute, a symbol of strength and defiance. In the eyes of those around her, she was no longer just a customer, but someone who had stood up, challenged injustice, and emerged victorious. Olivia stood tall, her sharp gaze fixed unwaveringly on Ethan, piercing through the thin veneer of confidence he was desperately trying to maintain. Her voice, calm yet commanding, carried the weight of a rushing river, dismantling any illusion of control he still thought he had. "All right. If you're certain about this," she said, enunciating each word with precision. "I want to speak to your manager right now." Ethan blinked, momentarily caught off guard by her composed yet firm response. It was a reaction he hadn't expected, far removed from the defensiveness or fear he'd hoped for. But his surprise lasted only a brief moment before he quickly reverted to his faux professional demeanor. Lifting his radio, he spoke with forced authority. "Manager, please come to the cleaning supplies section. There's an incident that requires attention." Lowering the radio, Ethan's eyes darted toward Olivia, trying to gauge her reaction. But all he met was a blade-like glare. Olivia didn't flinch, nor did she betray even the slightest unease. Her composure began to unsettle him. Not willing to relinquish control, Ethan waved over another employee. A younger man in the store's uniform hurried over, his face a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Ethan gave a quick, biased summary of the situation, positioning himself as the one in charge, then turned back to Olivia with a cold expression. The younger employee, after listening, turned to Olivia with a scrutinizing look. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low but laced with skepticism, as though Olivia were already a defendant in a trial where Ethan played a prosecutor. Olivia took a deep breath, steadying herself against the frustration bubbling inside. Keeping her gaze steady on both men, she spoke, each word sharp and deliberate. "What's going on?" she repeated, her tone cutting. "I'm shopping, and he is accusing me of being suspicious without any legitimate reason, other than his flawed instincts." The younger employee glanced at Ethan, seemingly looking for confirmation. Ethan nodded quickly, his face lit with a momentary glimmer of satisfaction, as though bolstered by this implied support. But before either of them could say anything further, a voice from the crowd interrupted, breaking the suffocating tension. "This isn't the first time this has happened." An older woman with thinning silver hair stepped forward from the gathering onlookers. She fixed Ethan with a disapproving glare. "I saw this same man do something similar to a young black boy a few weeks ago. The child was just looking at toys, but he accused him of stealing without any proof." Her words struck like a spark igniting dry tinder, setting off a blaze of indignation among the crowd. Conversations grew louder, and the curious stares morphed into angry glances directed at Ethan. A few others nodded in agreement, as though they too had witnessed or heard of similar behavior. Ethan, now trapped in the crossfire of rising criticism, tried to maintain his composure. He straightened his posture and spoke with a strained attempt at professionalism, though his voice faltered. "I'm just following store policy," he said, clinging to it like a shield. If there's an issue, the manager will handle it." Olivia stepped closer, narrowing the gap between them but not out of submission. Her sharp, unyielding gaze locked onto his, making it impossible for him to look away. "Good," she said, her voice low but resonant, carrying the weight of authority. "We'll wait right here for the manager, and I look forward to hearing how he explains your behavior, in front of everyone who's watching." Her words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown, heightening the already stifling tension. Ethan remained silent, his face frozen, his eyes flickering between confusion and simmering frustration. For the first time during the encounter, he realized he was losing control. The crowd was no longer passive. A young man called out from the back, "She's right! You owe her an apology." Another woman nearby clicked her tongue in disapproval. "This is unacceptable. Just look at how he's treating her." The murmurs and protests grew louder as the scene escalated. Some shoppers pulled out their phones to record the unfolding confrontation, while others openly questioned or berated Ethan. Through it all, Olivia stood firm, unmoved by the noise and pressure. She wasn't just defending herself. She was speaking for everyone who had ever faced similar injustice. Amid the mounting tension, a man in a crisp white shirt with a name tag appeared, his demeanor calm, but his expression serious. It was immediately clear to everyone that he was the manager. The crowd's attention shifted toward him, and the atmosphere grew even more charged as Olivia's voice rang out, steady and authoritative. "You've finally arrived," she said, addressing the manager directly. "I want an explanation, right here, right now, for how your employee has treated an innocent customer." The manager's eyes swept across the room, taking in the crowd, Ethan, and finally Olivia. He understood instantly that this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was a moment where every word, every action would be publicly scrutinized, not just by one person, but by all the eyes now focused intently on him. The air in the store aisle seemed to thicken, every gaze in the crowd fixed on Olivia and Ethan. The sound of hurried footsteps shattered the silence like an alarm signaling the escalation of tension. A short man in a blue polo shirt, the store manager, appeared, his face pale with worry. His eyes scanned the gathered crowd before settling on Olivia and Ethan, where the tension felt almost tangible. "What's going on here?" the manager asked, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempt to appear composed. Ethan immediately stepped forward, seizing the opportunity to regain control. He straightened his posture, though the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed his unease. "She's been acting very suspiciously," he said loudly, pointing at Olivia. "I'm just following store policy. I asked to check her bag, but she's refusing to cooperate." Olivia stood still, as immovable as a statue, her sharp gaze fixed unflinchingly on Ethan, peeling back the layers of his words. Calmly, she bent down to pick up her shopping basket, then walked toward the manager with an air of calm authority. "So, this is how you treat your customers?" Olivia asked, her voice cold and cutting like a winter wind, slicing through the room. "Following them, accusing them, and publicly humiliating them without a shred of evidence?" the manager faltered. His gaze flicked from Olivia to Ethan and back to Olivia, his expression growing more uneasy. "Ma'am, if there's been any misunderstanding, I sincerely apologize," he stammered, his voice shaky. "But Mr. Brooks here was just doing his job, trying to ensure store security." Olivia narrowed her eyes, her lips curling into a faint, sardonic smile. Before the manager could finish, she reached into her back pocket and pulled out a small object, raising it for everyone to see. A shiny badge gleamed under the store's overhead lights, instantly capturing the attention of everyone around. Time seemed to stand still as shock rippled through the crowd. The expressions on Ethan's face, the manager's, and the onlookers transformed from anger and curiosity to outright astonishment. For a moment, silence reigned. Then a voice from the crowd exclaimed, "She's a police chief?" Nearby customers exchanged incredulous glances, their surprise evident. Ethan froze where he stood, his eyes wide, his face turned ashen, as though he'd just been dealt a crushing blow. I didn't know," he stammered, his voice trembling and stripped of any authority. Olivia's gaze never wavered from Ethan. Her voice, sharp and resolute, cut through the air. "You didn't know? Then let me educate you. A security officer has no right to accuse someone based on his biases, and you will not justify this behavior without consequences." "Police Chief Olivia Harper," she declared, her voice as strong and commanding as thunder. "I oversee this entire area. Did you think accusing me without any evidence was a smart decision?" Ethan stood frozen, his face shifting from confusion to pale dread. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. The younger employee standing nearby was equally stunned, his wide eyes reflecting his shock. The manager stood motionless, as though rooted to the spot, his breath caught in his throat. I didn't know," Ethan stammered again, his voice faltering as he clung to the last shreds of his composure. "I was just following protocol, ma'am." "Following protocol?" Olivia interrupted, her voice as cold as ice. She took a deliberate step closer to Ethan, her tone quiet yet reverberating through the room. "Then, tell me, why didn't you apply your so-called protocol to the white man over there, stuffing merchandise into his coat pocket in the corner of the store? Did you not see him, or did you just choose not to look?" Her words landed like a lightning strike. A few heads in the crowd turned toward the corner she had pointed out. There, a blond man stood, furtively tucking a small item into his coat. The truth Olivia had just revealed shattered the tension into pieces. "She's right," a woman near the front whispered angrily. "I saw him too. He's been stealing and no one even noticed." Ethan stood paralyzed, his face now ghostly pale, his eyes darting around desperately, searching for support. But the crowd's collective fury made it clear no one was on his side. The manager finally found his voice, turning to Ethan, his tone shaking. "Brooks, is that true? Did you ignore him?" Olivia didn't let anyone interrupt. She continued, her words striking like a hammer against the stifling atmosphere. "I want to know if you apply your rules to everyone, or just target people like me." The weight of her words pressed heavily on the room. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Olivia wasn't just calling out Ethan. She was laying bare the ugly reality of bias and injustice for all to see. "Ma'am," the manager stammered, his voice quaking. "I'm deeply sorry. We'll handle this immediately." "No," Olivia cut him off, her voice razor sharp. "I want assurance that this will never happen again. Not to me, and not to anyone else." She turned to address the crowd, her voice rising with strength and conviction. "This isn't just about me. This is about all of us. About saying no to prejudice and injustice that we've tolerated for far too long." The crowd seemed to draw energy from her words. A few people nodded, and scattered applause began to ripple through the room. Ethan stared at the ground, unable to lift his head to meet anyone's eyes. The manager stood frozen, unsure of what to do beyond nodding in agreement. Olivia cast a sweeping glance around the store, her eyes blazing with unshakable determination. "Remember this," she said, her voice clear and resonant, like a final decree. No one has the right to accuse others just because they're different. With that, she turned, picked up her shopping basket and walked away, leaving behind a room filled with reflection and people forever changed by the moment they had just witnessed. The air in the aisle grew stifling after Olivia revealed her identity. Ethan, who had previously exuded confidence and arrogance, now stood motionless, his face pale. He struggled to find words of defense, but the truth was glaringly obvious, and the silence of the surrounding crowd only made the situation heavier. Olivia's piercing gaze remained fixed on Ethan. Her voice was calm, yet every word cut through the space like a blade. "You think you can act without accountability? I want your full name, position, and any relevant information so I can report this behavior to your superiors." Ethan drew a deep breath as if clinging to the last remnants of his dignity. Yet his voice trembled as he replied, "Ethan Brooks. I'm a security guard at this store." "Write it down," Olivia interrupted, her eyes shifting toward the manager. "I want to make sure this behavior isn't ignored or covered up." The manager, looking flustered and anxious, nodded repeatedly. He turned to Ethan, his tone now devoid of any pretense of defense. "Brooks, I have to say, this isn't the first time I've heard about behavior like this from you." The statement struck Ethan like a direct blow. All eyes now turned to him. A few customers began murmuring, their disapproving looks reflecting their thoughts. "Not the first time?" Olivia repeated, her voice steady, though her eyes burned with restrained anger. Before the manager could answer, a young man from the crowd stepped forward, pointing at Ethan with a voice full of indignation. "I've been followed by him too, just a few weeks ago. I didn't do anything wrong, but he kept trailing me like I was about to steal something." An older woman nodded in agreement and added, "This happens all the time. We've all seen it, but no one wanted to speak up because we didn't want trouble." Ethan lowered his head, unable to respond. His eyes avoided everyone, the smugness from earlier completely replaced by evident shame. The manager, now left with no choice, turned to Ethan and spoke with a heavy voice. "Ethan, you're suspended effective immediately. We do not tolerate this kind of behavior in our store." Ethan opened his mouth as if to protest, but any words he might have had were silenced by Olivia's unyielding gaze. She didn't need to say anything more. Her silence was enough to crush any resistance he might have tried to muster. Olivia turned to the manager, nodding slowly. "You'd better review your policies and procedures. I will file a full report to ensure this doesn't happen again." The manager nodded fervently, while the crowd around them began to stir with murmurs of approval. A few people even clapped lightly, showing their support for Olivia and their frustration with Ethan's discriminatory actions. Olivia, still calm and composed, stood her ground with unwavering strength. The incident might have concluded, but in her heart, she knew this was just one small step in a larger battle against the injustices she and so many others had endured. After the incident, the store manager not only suspended Ethan, but also committed to making significant changes to the store's operations. Olivia made it explicitly clear that the store needed to implement mandatory training sessions on cultural awareness and anti-racism for all employees. "This isn't just the responsibility of individuals, it's a systemic issue," Olivia stated firmly to the manager, her voice resolute and authoritative. A few days later, the store chain announced through various media channels that it would roll out nationwide training programs and establish a hotline for customers and employees to report discriminatory behavior. The move was widely praised, but also served as a stark reminder that meaningful change required constant vigilance and oversight. As everything came to an end, Olivia picked up her shopping basket and began walking out of the store. Her steps were heavy, each one carrying the weight of frustration and an unspeakable pain. The cold air from outside rushed in through the automatic doors, but it did nothing to extinguish the simmering anger and quiet indignation within her. The morning sunlight streamed through the clear glass, casting reflections on Olivia's face, yet it failed to dispel the darkness in her soul. On the contrary, the light seemed to highlight the burden pressing down on her mind, her thoughts spiraling deeper into her emotions. She paused briefly at the entrance, glancing around. Inside, customers continued their shopping, carts rolling gently across the polished floors. Conversations, laughter, and the playful sounds of children filled the space, a scene of normalcy that remained untouched by the confrontation moments earlier. But for Olivia, everything had changed. She felt like an outsider, standing on the periphery, observing a world she no longer trusted. A question echoed in her mind, one she couldn't silence. How many people have been treated unjustly like I was today? How many, without power or a voice, have endured in silence, unable to defend themselves? Faces flashed through her mind, nameless individuals, women, children, people of color like her, all of whom had been judged, belittled, simply because of their appearance or background. Memories from her past surged forward, overwhelming her in a wave of anguish she thought she had overcome. She recalled her first encounter with injustice as a 10-year-old girl. It was a sweltering summer day, and she had accompanied her mother to a small department store. While waiting for her mother to check out, she stood by a display, admiring small trinkets she knew they couldn't afford. A store clerk approached her, his gaze filled with suspicion and disdain. "This girl is stealing," he shouted, drawing everyone's attention. She still remembered the searing shame, as if all the store's lights were focused solely on her. Her mother tried to defend her, but the cold accusation and baseless judgment etched themselves into Olivia's mind, serving as her first lesson in the world's capacity for injustice against the innocent. Adulthood offered no respite. When Olivia decided to pursue a career in law enforcement, she believed she could change the system from within. But on her very first patrol assignment, a male colleague sneered, "I'm sure they only picked you to meet their diversity quota." She remembered his eyes, not those of a teammate, but of someone who had judged her long before she had the chance to prove herself. She had to endure the whispers, the second-guessing, the skeptical glances she was never invited to address. Those memories were no longer wounds, but weapons, fragments of her past that forged her into who she was today. Stronger, more determined, unyielding to injustice and unwilling to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. Olivia stopped in the parking lot, her gaze fixed on the store behind her. Her eyes no longer burned with anger, but with steely resolve. She knew this incident was not an isolated event. It was a symptom of a system riddled with prejudice, a system she had sworn to fight. "This isn't just about me," Olivia whispered, her voice echoing in the stillness. "This is about all of us. The ones who've endured too long, the ones who've never had the chance to stand up for themselves." She turned and walked toward her car, but her steps were no longer heavy. Instead, they carried the weight of determination. She knew this battle would never end, but she also knew she would never retreat. Before opening her car door, Olivia glanced back at the store one last time. A glimmer of light flickered in her eyes. Not anger, but an unshakable will. "I won't stop," she said, as if making a promise to herself and to all those who had remained silent. I will fight, not just for me, but for everyone who cannot speak out. She slid into her car and turned the key. The engine roared to life, blending with the soft rustle of the wind, a declaration of the beginning of a new journey. This time, Olivia was not just a woman fighting against injustice. She was a flame, a symbol, and she would never let that flame go out. As Olivia settled into the driver's seat, the hum of the engine broke the silence but failed to quiet the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, and she made no immediate move to leave. For a moment, she stared blankly ahead, her gaze sharp yet deep, as though piercing into the roots of a far larger problem. She knew the events of that morning couldn't end here. Ethan's suspension might have been a small victory, but it was like extinguishing a single flame while the forest around it continued to smolder. Ethan was just one small cog in a system corroded by prejudice, a system where people like Olivia were routinely judged and accused because of their skin color, gender, or background. She pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, and began listing her next steps. First, she needed to file an official report with the chain's security management. But that wasn't enough. She knew she had to do more to ensure such incidents wouldn't happen again. Not to her, and not to anyone. One of Olivia's self-assigned missions was to work with the local community to raise awareness about the insidious impact of prejudice in everyday life. She contacted a nonprofit focused on equality and proposed hosting workshops in the area, not just for store employees but for community members as well. If we want change, it has to start with awareness, Olivia thought, her fingers typing rapidly on her phone. She decided to demand that the store chain implement structured training on anti-racism and cultural sensitivity, not as a performative measure, but as a mandatory standard. A program robust enough to shift mindsets and reshape behaviors across the entire workforce. Opening her email, she began to write, her words sharp and resolute. Dear Senior Management, I am Police Chief Olivia Harper. I'm writing to report a serious incident that occurred at your store this morning involving discriminatory behavior by one of your employees. I demand a thorough investigation and concrete actions to ensure this does not happen again. Change begins with education. Your company must implement mandatory training on anti-racism and cultural sensitivity for all staff. Without systemic change, you risk not only losing customer trust, but continuing to harm innocent people. I look forward to your prompt response. Sincerely, Olivia Harper. Olivia pressed send and felt a small sense of relief, but she knew the fight was far from over. Just a few hours later, as she sat at home, her phone buzzed repeatedly. A friend had sent her a link along with a message. This morning's incident is going viral. Opening the link, Olivia found a social media post featuring a video of her confrontation with Ethan. The caption read, Police Chief Olivia Harper stands up against injustice at a local store. This isn't just one woman's story. It's a lesson for all of us. The video quickly amassed thousands of likes, shares, and comments. Many expressed admiration for Olivia while sharing their own experiences with discrimination. I've been treated the same way, one commenter wrote. Thank you, Olivia, for speaking up for all of us. An inspiring story, another commented. These store chains need to overhaul their policies and employee training. The movement grew faster than Olivia had anticipated. People began demanding that the store chain take accountability and implement meaningful reforms. Her phone buzzed again. This time an email from the senior management of the store chain. They pledged to conduct cultural sensitivity training sessions and issued a public apology to Olivia across all corporate media platforms. Reading the email, a faint smile crossed Olivia's face, but she knew this was only the beginning. True change wouldn't come from promises alone. It would require tangible action. Sitting in her car later, looking out at the sky that was beginning to clear after a veil of gray clouds, Olivia felt a new wave of emotion. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was hope. She knew her story had resonated with many. More importantly, it sparked a broader conversation about discrimination and the deep-seated prejudices embedded in society. Starting the engine, Olivia paused before driving off. She glanced back at the store one last time, her gaze no longer carrying anger but a powerful message. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. As she drove away, Olivia left behind more than just a story. She left behind inspiration for thousands. For her, however, the journey ahead wasn't about her alone. It was about fighting for fairness, giving voice to the voiceless, and building a future where everyone is treated equally. As Olivia emerged into the bustling flow of traffic, the gentle golden sunlight filtered through her car windows, softly brushing her face like a tender reassurance after the storm. Yet, even the warmth of the sun couldn't dissipate the weight of her swirling thoughts. Olivia's heart, though strong, ached, not from personal pain, but from the sharp realization that the incident she had just endured was far more than an isolated event. What happened at the store wasn't just about her, Ethan, or an ignorant employee. It was a reflection of a deeply rooted societal problem. Persistent, invisible prejudices and stereotypes imposed on individuals because of their appearance, skin color, or status. These prejudices didn't just create injustice, they stifled opportunities and silently hurt countless lives. Olivia thought back to the astonished faces of the crowd when she revealed her badge. Their shift in attitude, from suspicion and curiosity to respect and solidarity, left a bittersweet taste. If I weren't a police chief, Olivia wondered, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. If I didn't have authority, would the truth have come to light? Or would I have been one of those who silently walked away carrying an unseen wound? These thoughts gnawed at her, dragging her back into the events of the day. Olivia knew the change in people's attitudes wasn't because they suddenly recognized their mistake, it was because of the power and position she held. Another question echoed in her mind. How many people out there without power or a voice have had to bow before injustice simply because they had no way to defend themselves? She pondered the true meaning of fairness. Power should not be the only shield against injustice. Fairness and respect must be foundational, not privileges. Everyone, regardless of who they are, deserves to be treated with dignity, not based on their appearance, title, or the biases of others. To Olivia, today's events were a powerful reminder for everyone. You never know who you're treating unfairly, she thought, determination flaring in her gaze. They could be a friend, a loved one, or even someone with the power to change your life. But above all, they are human, with their intrinsic worth. Don't let prejudice blind you to that truth. A faint smile crossed her lips as she thought about her next steps. She wouldn't let today's story be reduced to a resolved incident or an apology followed by superficial training. Olivia believed in the power of small actions, from speaking up when witnessing injustice to candidly confronting one's own biases. The world won't change overnight, Olivia told herself, her eyes on the long road ahead. But it can get better, one person at a time. Every small change is a brick in the foundation of a fairer society. As her car rolled along the road stretching into the distance, the sunlight continued to pour down like a promise. Olivia felt a sense of calm, not because the store incident was resolved, but because she knew she had planted a seed for change. She understood that her story, and others like it, would become pieces of a larger mosaic, a tapestry of hope, respect, and understanding. Before merging into the dense flow of vehicles, Olivia silently reminded herself, and the world. Treat others fairly. Think before you judge. You never know who you're looking down on or the story they carry. The soft, golden light illuminated the road ahead, like nature's promise of a brighter tomorrow. Olivia knew that the future was still distant, but she believed the change had begun. With one small story, one woman who dared to speak up, and countless hearts beginning to awaken. Just weeks after the incident, a local news article praised Olivia as the catalyst for meaningful reform. Stores in the region began implementing stricter internal policies to prevent discriminatory practices. Beyond that, Olivia's story inspired many to share their own experiences of injustice. A grassroots online movement with the hashtag #ThinkBeforeYouJudge spread widely, encouraging people to share personal stories and advocate for mutual respect. Chief Olivia Harper's story became more than a lesson in justice. It was a profound reminder of how we treat one another in daily life. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an injustice like Olivia's? How would you handle such a situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story made you reflect or inspired you, don't forget to like, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more meaningful stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.